Most people do not realize how little it can take to make a roof look abandoned. A thin green layer, a few damp shadows under the trees, some fuzzy patches are creeping between shingle tabs. Then suddenly the whole house looks older, heavier, neglected, like the roof is failing even when the structure underneath is still doing its job. And that is exactly where the panic begins. Because the moment roof moss shows up, the prices show up with it. Professional cleaning quotes. Talk of scraping. Talk of replacement. Talk of specialized treatments that somehow cost more than a month of groceries. But buried under all that noise is a much simpler truth. In many cases, moss is not defeated by brute force. It is defeated by chemistry, patience, and understanding what the moss is actually using your roof for. That changes the whole picture. Because the biggest mistake people make is thinking roof moss is like dirt. It is not. You cannot treat it like mud on a driveway or stains on a patio. Moss is a living sponge. It grips moisture, traps debris, and slowly turns your roof into the exact damp, shaded habitat it wants. Scrubbing attacks the symptom. Pressure washing often attacks the roof. But the cheap liquid method people overlook goes after the organism itself. And once you understand that, you stop seeing this as a labor problem and start seeing it as a control problem. The question is not how hard can you scrape. The question is, how do you make the roof stop being comfortable for moss in the first place? The answer, in a lot of everyday cases, is shockingly unglamorous. A basic bleach-based wash, mixed and applied correctly, is often enough to kill surface moss and loosen its hold without turning the job into an all-day wrestling match. Not magic, not mystery, just a plain, low-cost liquid doing what expensive services often rely on too, only wrapped in more equipment, more branding, and a much bigger invoice. And that is why this matters. Because once something gets packaged as a specialist service, people assume the underlying method must be complex. Very often, it is not. Very often, what got expensive was not the chemistry. It was the labor, the risk, the business overhead, and the fact that most homeowners have been trained to distrust simple solutions. Older trades understood this difference instinctively. They knew there were jobs where force was the wrong tool. You do not sand away mildew from a damp wall if you have not solved the moisture. You do not keep scraping algae if the surface still feeds it. And roof moss belongs to that same category. Long before modern retail roof treatments came in flashy containers with premium labels, people used basic caustic or oxidizing washes to kill growth on exterior surfaces. The materials changed, the labels got better, the warnings got more standardized, but the principle stayed almost embarrassingly simple. If a living growth depends on damp organic buildup and a friendly surface, you either physically tear it away or you make that surface chemically hostile enough that the growth dies and releases. But the real reason this matters is deeper than that. Moss is not just cosmetic. On asphalt shingles especially, it can hold water exactly where water is least welcome. It can lift the lower edges of shingles. It can trap grit and decaying leaves. In freezing weather, retained moisture can make everything worse. On some roofs, that damage stays superficial for a long time. On others, especially older roofs already nearing the end of their service life, moss becomes one more force accelerating wear. So when someone says it is only a little green, that may be true for today. It may not be true after another wet season. And this is where the story shifts, because now you are not just talking about appearance. You are talking about preserving a surface that would cost thousands to replace. The irony is that the more obvious moss becomes, the more tempted people are to attack it the wrong way. They climb up there with a pressure washer. They dig at it with a stiff tool. They drag a broom across shingles that were designed to shed water, not absorb abuse. And a roof that might have been cleaned with minimal force ends up losing granules, shedding protective material, or taking damage around edges and flashing. Moss feels soft, but the damage created by removing it carelessly can be very real. That is why the cheap liquid method has such a powerful appeal. It trades violence for patience. It says, let the solution do the work first, then let weather and time finish what brute force would have tried to rush. Here's the mechanism in plain English. A bleach-based solution, usually made from ordinary household chlorine bleach, diluted with water, lands on the moss and starts breaking down living tissue. The moss does not need to be ripped off in that instant. It needs to die. Once it dies, it loses grip, dries out, changes color, and begins to let go. Rain, sun, and normal weathering help clear the remains. Sometimes light rinsing or very gentle follow-up removal helps. Often, the biggest visible transformation comes over days and weeks rather than in the first 5 minutes. That delay matters because a lot of people assume a method failed if it did not create instant before and after drama. But with biological growth, immediate theater and long-term effectiveness are not the same thing. And yes, this is why cheap can work. The active ingredient is doing the heavy lifting, not the price tag. A small amount of generic bleach can cost only a few dollars. Mixed carefully in a garden sprayer with water, it becomes the core of a soft wash style treatment. That does not mean every roof should be sprayed casually. It means the barrier to entry is lower than most people think. The core tools are humble: a pump sprayer or garden sprayer, a hose for pre-wetting plants and rinsing accidental overspray, gloves, eye protection, old clothes you do not care about, a stable way to work without taking foolish risks. For a problem that so often gets sold as a premium headache, that simplicity feels almost offensive, which is exactly why it spreads by word of mouth. Still, honesty matters here. There is no single liquid that works for good, in the literal sense, if your roof remains shaded, damp, and packed with organic debris. Moss comes back when the conditions come back. That is not a failure of the liquid. That is biology doing what biology does. So the real victory is not pretending one spray changes the laws of nature. The real victory is understanding that a low-cost treatment can reset the surface, buy time, improve the look of the roof, and reduce moss pressure without paying for a full service call every time green patches appear. And once you add small prevention habits, the effect lasts longer. So what does the process actually look like when done with restraint instead of hype? It starts before the liquid ever touches the roof. You identify where the moss is heaviest. Usually, that means shaded sections, north-facing slopes, spots under overhanging trees, valleys where debris gathers, or areas where moisture tends to linger after rain. Then you look at what else is nearby. Delicate landscaping, painted trim, metal fixtures, gutters are already loaded with debris, anything that could react badly to runoff. That part matters because the same chemistry that kills moss can also bleach fabric, irritate skin, discolor some finishes, and stress plants if you treat the job carelessly. Cheap does not mean casual. Cheap only means the raw material is affordable. Skill still matters. Once the area is assessed, the smartest move is usually to avoid walking directly on a mossy roof unless you are properly equipped and know what you are doing. Moss is slippery. Wet shingles are slippery. Roof edges do not forgive mistakes. There is a big difference between a practical homeowner method and a reckless one. Many people can treat reachable lower sections from a ladder position or extension setup, but if the pitch is steep, the roof is high, or the access is bad, the money you save is not worth a fall. That is one of the most important truths in this whole conversation. Self-reliance is not proving fearlessness. It is knowing where the real line is. If the roof is safely reachable, people often use a simple diluted bleach mix in a pump sprayer, strong enough to affect growth, not so aggressive that it becomes a splashy hazard. Some also add a little water only and nothing else. That restraint is wise because mixing bleach with the wrong cleaner can be dangerous. Never with ammonia, never with acidic products, never with mystery leftovers from under the sink. You are not making a witch's brew. You are using one known chemical, diluted and handled on purpose. Applied to a dry day with mild conditions, not strong wind, not blazing heat, not rain about to wash it off instantly. Then comes the part that disappoints people who crave spectacle and rewards people who understand process. You do not need to attack the moss with a broom the second the liquid lands. You let the solution dwell, you allow it to soak into the growth, you give chemistry time to do what a muscle would otherwise try to force. Some moss patches darken, some lighten, some take longer than others. Thick clumps may need repeat treatment, but the whole advantage of this method is that it separates killing from scraping. Once that shift clicks in your mind, you stop measuring success by how dramatic the first minute looks. There are also roof areas where caution matters more than enthusiasm. You do not want to blast liquid under shingle edges. You do not want heavy runoff pouring onto prized shrubs without pre-wetting and dilution. You do not want prolonged contact with certain metals, especially if corrosion is already a concern. You do not want to soak old seals around skylights or vents just because you are chasing perfect coverage. And you absolutely do not want to use high pressure as a shortcut afterwards, because that is where a moss cleanup can quietly become roof damage. The liquid is there to reduce aggression, not justify it. This is also why the method got misunderstood over time. Modern homeowners are surrounded by products designed to look proprietary: specialized roof treatments, fancy labels, subscription maintenance plans, service packages built around urgency. Some of those services are useful, some are worth paying for, especially when access is dangerous or the roof material is delicate. But the existence of a business model can make a simple principle seem exotic. Once people hear soft wash system or roof restoration chemistry, they imagine something industrial and rare. In reality, many treatments still lean on the same broad idea. Use a chemical wash to kill the organic growth instead of grinding it off like a stain. Convenience played a role too. For a long time, plenty of people stopped learning these small maintenance methods because hiring out became normal. Not because every task truly required a specialist, but because modern life rewards outsourcing and punishes attention. Most homeowners are busy. Most do not want to think about roof biology. They want the problem gone. And when a simple method competes against a polished promise, the polished promise often wins. There is nothing sinister about that. It is just how markets work. Complexity sells well when people feel vulnerable. A roof is expensive. Fear makes the expensive option feel safer, even when the core solution may be fairly ordinary. At the same time, there is a reason professionals exist, and ignoring that would make this sound dumber than it needs to. Professionals bring insurance, equipment, safety training, access solutions, and experience with different roofing materials. Cedar, slate, tile, asphalt, metal, and composite systems each has its own sensitivities. What works on one surface may be a bad idea on another. So the honest version of this story is not never hire anyone. The honest version is that many people have been conditioned to think the chemistry itself is the mystery, when often the mystery is really logistics and liability. Once you separate those two, you can make a smarter decision. And this is where the practical value becomes real. If you have an asphalt shingle roof with localized moss, manageable access, and the discipline to work carefully, a low-cost bleach-based wash can be a legitimate money-saving option. It can clean up dark green patches, it can stop the moss from thriving, it can improve curb appeal without hours of scrubbing, it can buy you time before the roof looks bad enough to trigger worry or complaints. It can also teach you something quietly powerful, which is that maintenance is often less about heroic labor and more about understanding the material in front of you. The viewer who benefits most from this is not necessarily the extreme DIY person. It is the ordinary homeowner who is tired of being pushed into false choices. Either ignore the moss and hope for the best, or spend a large amount on a service call. There is usually a middle path, a careful inspection, a targeted treatment, a realistic expectation, then prevention. Trim branches to increase sunlight and airflow, clear leaves and debris so moisture does not sit, keep gutters flowing so water exits the system instead of backing into vulnerable zones. Consider strips or products meant to discourage regrowth if your roof style and local conditions make that practical. The liquid treatment does the reset. The maintenance habits protect the reset. Another reason this feels almost forbidden is that it exposes how often dramatic labor is confused with effective labor. People trust what looks hard. They trust noise, pressure, ladders, scraping, foam cannons, full uniforms, and before and after performance. Quiet competence rarely gets marketed with the same force, but roofs do not care what looks impressive. They care about what preserves the surface. If a gentle chemical treatment solves the biological problem with less abrasion, that is not a hack in the cheap internet sense. That is simply using the right kind of force, and that distinction can save real money over the life of a home. Still, let's not romanticize it. There are limits. If moss is thick enough that it has built deep mats across large sections, if shingles are already curling or cracking, if the roof is near the end of its life, if water intrusion is already happening, then cleaning is not the whole story. Dead moss on a failing roof does not become a healthy roof. In those cases, the treatment may improve appearance, but it does not reverse age or structural wear. Likewise, if the house has sensitive landscaping below every runoff line, if the pitch is steep, or if local conditions make safe access unrealistic, the do-it-yourself savings may evaporate fast. A method can be sound and still not be right for every person or every roof, and the safety piece is not optional. Bleach can irritate lungs, eyes, and skin. Overspray can mark surfaces you did not mean to touch. Runoff can stress plants if you do not pre-wet and rinse. Mixing bleach with other cleaners can create dangerous fumes. Wet roofs are slippery. Mossy roofs are even worse. That is not fear-mongering. That is respect for the job. Good DIY is not macho. Good DIY is controlled, boring, and slightly paranoid in all the right places. It is gloves on, hose ready, weather checked, plants were watered down, no mystery mixtures, no pressure washer blasting upward under shingles, no climbing higher just because you are already there. What makes this whole method so satisfying is not only the visible cleanup, it is the psychological reversal underneath it. A roof covered in moss makes a house feel like it is winning against you. Every glance upward becomes a reminder of deferred maintenance, future cost, and possible damage. But when you understand that the green takeover is often vulnerable to a basic, affordable liquid and some patience, the emotion changes. The roof becomes legible again. The problem shrinks back down to size. You stop seeing an expensive crisis and start seeing a maintenance cycle. That shift matters far beyond moss. Because once a person learns that many household problems survive on confusion more than difficulty, they start looking at everything differently. They stop assuming the high quote means the mechanism is complicated. They start asking what the active ingredient is, what the real labor is, what risk they are actually paying someone else to absorb, and whether there is a safe middle ground between neglect and outsourcing. Sometimes the answer will still be to call the pro, but sometimes the answer will be a $3 bottle, a sprayer, a pair of gloves, and the willingness to understand what you are doing instead of panicking. So no, the miracle is not that one cheap liquid rewrites reality. The miracle is smaller and more believable than that. It is a common problem that so many people read as expensive and overwhelming, but it can, in the right conditions, be handled with a very ordinary solution. It is that the moss does not need a duel. It needs a hostile environment. It is often the case that your roof needs less violence and more understanding. And once you see that, you start reclaiming a kind of knowledge that used to be normal, the kind that keeps houses livable, bills lower, and fear from driving every decision. A clean roof after moss treatment does not just look better. It feels like order returning. It feels like you caught the problem before it became a story someone else sold back to you at a premium. It feels like practical intelligence beating unnecessary complexity. And in a world where almost every maintenance issue arrives wrapped in anxiety and upselling, that feeling is worth more than people admit. Because sometimes the biggest savings are not only in dollars, sometimes they are in confidence, in clarity, and in remembering that not every stubborn problem needs a specialist myth around it. Sometimes it just needs the right liquid, the right caution, and the patience to let simple knowledge do what brute force never could.